everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Last episode, we talked about our preseason prep for the upcoming season, the 2022 season, and in that episode, we talked a lot about what we're going through with our gear, like what we're looking for, all this kind of stuff. And recently, we also released a gear overview video where I did a full run through of my gear for 2022. And one of the things that I said in that is that I'm not really looking to add a whole lot of pieces to what I've got. I'm pretty satisfied with what I've got. That being said, there's still always opportunities for you to, even if your kit is pretty solid, there's still other ways that you can improve on your kit in a variety of different smaller but pretty significant ways. And so today, Pat and I thought we would take this time to look at some of the things that players could add to their kit that maybe they haven't even really considered it yet, but that we in our time playing have found pretty useful, as well as some other things that we're going to be looking at either trying or modifying in our kit for the season to come. So starting out, one thing that actually, a discussion that happened on the Discord a little while ago was around when should you be looking at buying a second gun, like a backup gun or something like that. And one of the things that I mentioned on the Discord, which is true, is that I don't actually have a backup gun. I mean, I have a sidearm, but I don't have a backup rifle. And largely that's because anytime that I really need one, I can go bum one off Pat or bum one off, Chris or Cal or whomever, right? I have a lot of opportunity if I want to.
Pick a Storm Rider, any Storm Rider.
Exactly, right? But at the same time, like, it's a good thing to be looking at. Like, you look at your kit being pretty set, you may want to consider getting a second gun, right? Even as, like we said, I believe last time too, like, even if it's bone stock, it's great to have a second gun that, works and looks and feels like your standard gun, right?
I mean, even if you're not looking at upgrading the backup, the more we've talked about this since last episode, and even just like, doing the prep for this episode, if you will, shock, we actually, organize our thoughts a bit. Not that you believe it, but, it really kind of came into focus, I think, for both of us, that having a spare of some sort that you're comfortable using, that you can take to games, is actually kind of a really good idea. Yeah. If you're bringing, an M4, well, if you happen to be on a team with 5 other guys who own a couple of M4s, like, it's not a big deal, right? A 416 is an M4 is an M4. Not a big deal. But at the same time, if Phil and John go to play and it's just the two of them, which definitely happens, then, there's a potential situation where, one of their M4s goes down and they don't have a second one of any kind to work with. Mm-hmm. And I know Phil found, having to swap to guns that weren't dialed in frustrating a lot last season, right? And I would argue that a bone stock gun with some sort of red dot on it that's dialed in, so at least he knows it works within its tolerances and is zeroed, would probably have made that a lot less irritating.
Yeah, especially if I'm already sort of a little bit accustomed to it. Like, I've played with it and it's my gun and I'm familiar with it. And it has its own optics, so I don't have to do any like finagling or trying to put my optic on it and do a quick zero on it or anything like that, right?
A gun that is sort of serviceable for you and pull out of bag ready.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, like we've talked about before, that we kind of have the form factor that we want down, right? You and I can both, you definitely more than I can, but the both of us can really recite sort of the build list, right? It's a King Arms, M4, full metal body, low next gearbox, and the list goes on. But the top of that list is a King Arms, M4 metal body. And there's a lot to be said about just having one of those on hand, because it is possible, especially if you're like us and you're running the same gun very, very frequently, and if you're like me in particular, where you're not doing it particularly nicely, that you could have an incident, right? You could the gun could get damaged, the body could get damaged, or the body could fail in some way. There's a variety of different ways that even metal bodies can fail, right? I would say even especially metal bodies can fail. In which case, that's not necessarily an easy fix, right? So if you have a spare one, it makes it a lot easier for you to just put the stuff back together and then keep going, right?
And for a long time, there have been, spare guns, usually, honestly, a spare King Arms body sort of kicking around in our airsoft gun pool for the team. And I don't actually think there is one currently. So, that sort of, I guess, adds value to maybe the idea of Phil and I looking into that. I'm still working on getting that 416 for my AEG/backup gun. Which won't be a King Arms, but, I'm capable of doing the build in it anyway.
Yeah, right, of course.
Not a problem. So taking a look at that and going, okay, how do I want it to work? What do I want it to do? Shouldn't be too bad. But, for Phil's purposes, yeah, having a spare King Arms, if we can find one for a reasonable price, wouldn't be a bad idea, right? And even if we don't, put the time and money into it to make it, quite as good as his primary, it's still going to end up being, serviceable. A tight bore and a R-hop patch is not that much of an additional outlay, really.
And it's interesting because many airsofters may not be in the situation that I find myself in particular, because lots of airsofters like airsoft guns, right? That's why we're all here, but they just buy lots, right? And I know, Pat, you have more than one airsoft gun, and for the longest time that I've known you, you've typically had at least two, sometimes more than that. And I know Stefan has guns that he collects that don't actually see the field, and he's got multiple that he also uses. And same thing with John and all this kind of stuff. But if you're like me, or, even like Chris, right? Chris has one rifle. I have one rifle, right? And the reason why is because we know exactly what we like, and we get that working perfectly. And like I've poked fun at you before, you can only ever really use one rifle at a time. So what's the sense of having two, right? But there is a space where you can look at a backup and say, yes, I'm perfectly happy with my kit. Everything works fine. Everything works perfectly, but I still want to have a backup just in case. And I don't think there's a particular right time for you to be doing that. Like I wouldn't say, yes, after 6 months, get a backup gun. Like there's no, and I think you would agree, like there's no fixed timeline that says that you must.
Yeah, I don't think this is a hard rules kind of situation.
Definitely. But, if you're looking at your kit like I am, right, and saying, I don't really want anything, I don't have really anything to add at this particular time, if you don't have a backup gun, that would certainly be one thing that you might be considering. And hopefully somebody's listening to this and going, yeah, maybe I should. Maybe I haven't thought about it, but something I should look at.
And, we gear a lot of our content towards sort of the new airsoft player, right? And I don't really think this piece, strictly speaking, is, right? Like, if you're in your first year of playing airsoft, you probably don't need a spare gun.
Yeah, totally.
Unless you've gone... well, there are exceptions. And I was going to say, unless you've kind of gone ham.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're in a situation where you've been playing for a year or two, and you feel like there's money in your airsoft budget, I actually have really begun to be confident that this is not a bad approach, right? I currently have enough guns that, if Phil's gun breaks, he's got choice. Mm-hmm. But that assumes that I'm there. And it also, not that I won't hand over whatever I'm currently using to Phil so that he has a good time. It doesn't mean that if I'm trading out my M27, then I can't use it, right?
Yeah.
And so, obviously, I don't mean that as a, shot at Phil. I don't care for the most part. I will pull trigger on airsoft gun, no problem.
Yeah.
You may pick the airsoft gun. But especially if you are, as Phil and I both are, and frankly as Chris is too, particular about the functioning of your airsoft gear, there's probably some value there, and I I think Phil gets to cheat a little here in the sense that, if he picks up a King Arms body and wants to clone the gun that he has currently, he doesn't really have to pay the tech to do it.
Yeah, a little bit.
Which helps to save, helps to save some money, right? He doesn't have to pay me to do the work. He can just buy me dinner.
Or do it myself and you can supervise.
Well, yeah, right. Whatever.
Yeah.
Bit of both. So there's definitely benefit there that's not necessarily available if you don't have your own pocket gun tech. But, having a gun that you think works pretty well, that you understand, that's on tap if your primary rifle breaks, goes down, whatever, definitely has value.
Definitely. And to be clear, like if you're going to make a backup gun, and I've fallen down this trap as well, right? You have a backup gun and you're like, yep, this is going to be my backup. It actually has to be a backup. It needs to function, right? And what that means is you also can't go like I did with my quote unquote backup gun. You can't go shagging around, right? You can't go being like, oh, I'm going to try and do this. I'm going to do this other thing and make this. Like it needs to be in a situation where when you pick it up, it is going to function the way that you want it to. So that also means that if you're looking at a backup and it's a completely different platform, if it's completely different make model, maybe it looks really cool or it's fancy or shiny or what have you, it needs to function, right? So whatever you want that function to be, like it could be a sniper rifle, it could be a shotgun, it doesn't really matter as long as it functions. If it doesn't function, then that's not the whole purpose of this exercise, right? So if you do get a backup, whatever it is, make sure that it works, right? And if you're not going to put in the time that's necessary to make it work if you upgrade it, just leave it, right? As long as it's working, like Pat was saying at the start, a stock gun that works when you pull the trigger is better than as a backup than one that doesn't work, period, right?
Or one that's in, 15 pieces on your gun tech's bench.
Right? Or even on your workbench, right? Like if you're the gun tech.
Exactly, right? So if it's going to be a thing where you're like, well, I've got this, but it's my 47th project from Sunday, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's taken apart because it's my backup and it's a low priority because it's my backup. It's not really doing the thing you need it to be doing. So at that point, you've invested your money in a project more so than you have in a backup. And don't get me wrong, I have several of those literally in the next room. But I think you need to be real with yourself, right? Because if I needed any of those projects to be a gun tomorrow, that would be inconvenient.
Yeah.
Even accounting for the fact that like I have probably got the parts to rebuild most of them kicking around. So this is, more of a get something that you can actually have functioning and get it dialed in and get it zeroed and have it, go in your bag with you to games and be your spare in case something happens.
Yeah, totally.
And that also leaves you, I think, with a pretty good avenue for a serviceable loaner, right? So if you have friends who are new to Airsoft or who you want introduced to Airsoft, hey, loaner gun that works, that's already zeroed and dialed in decently, great. 10 out of 10. There's really no drawback to that, as far as I can tell. So I think we've kind of rattled through the possibilities of, buy a second gun as an immediate idea.
There's other stuff that's not like a big purchase either, right? Like just because you're trying to add, and I think this is a trap that I fall into, you're looking to spend some money on Airsoft because Airsoft is fun and, it gives you that it gives you like 2 serotonins every time you think about it.
Yes, the shopping endorphins, my favorite.
Yeah, totally. But like you don't need to as well be buying big ticket items to upgrade your kit in ways that are meaningful, right?
For sure. My new gloves cost $10. And I think the shipping was free. Like, it's not everything has to be expensive, kids.
Yeah. And there's some really important items that are not indeed expensive, but that can certainly make a huge difference for you. And I think, we've talked about this one before, but like first aid kits, man.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't mean like, some sort of trauma kit. I just mean like a boo-boo kit, right?
Yeah. Like go to the drugstore, spend $10, has 10 Band-Aids, a couple of strips of gauze, and some sort of antiseptic is adequate, right? But I have that on my kit. I, refresh it every year because antiseptic usually has about a 1-year shelf life unless you're using like hydrogen peroxide, which people will complain if you use on their guns.
And like, but the thing about it is, like, you also replenish it because it gets used. Like, those band-aids get used, right?
Well, that's the second thing I was going to say is, like, yeah, I do replenish it every year also because I use it every year.
Yeah.
People, scrape themselves on stuff and, bloody their arms up a little or whatever, and it's worth your while to stop in between games when you look at your arm and go, oh, I cut my arm on something, whatever. And, put a little antiseptic on it, put a bandage on it, keep it clean, and it's, on the one hand, I want to say, well, of course, that's common sense. But I know lots of airsofters who are like, whatever, it's not a big deal. And honestly, I'm one of them some of the time, right? Mm-hmm. So don't do what Pat does, do what he says.
For sure. And I've seen lots of players, who have like, they took a bloody BB hit or something like that, and they just sort of leave it as a badge of honor. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool and stuff, but like, would you please just clean that and put a bandage on it? I am not a doctor, but like from a medical standpoint, when you have a wound like that, you definitely should clean it and just keep it covered, right? This idea of airing them out that's not how you should proceed, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we play, a reasonable amount in the woods, which means that, if you're dropping prone quickly, you can land in, animal poop, right? Like, you don't really want to have to clean that out of a cut later. That's no totally good. And like, even when you're playing at a curated field, like a lot of curated airsoft fields have, frankly, have rodent problems. So that's not great. But they've also got like paintball goo all over the place. And a lot of that has cornstarch in it, which is, if it's been hanging out on a building for 6 to 8 weeks, probably not the best thing to get in your cuts.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not a doctor. I don't imagine this is, gonna like cause gangrene and cause your arm to fall off or anything. Really. But just, people get little nicks and cuts and bloody noses from a BB and, are like, oh yeah, let's put a bandage on that just real quick. And it helps give people peace of mind in some cases. And in honestly, some cases it's been really, like, oh, that's actually not ideal. You should probably put something significant on that. Like I have a couple of, surgical dressings in there. Not because I really expect anyone to have, a huge gaping hole in the airsoft, but, people have fallen and cut their arms on stuff. I'd say once every 2 or 3 years.
Stepped on rusty nails. That's another one we've seen.
Oh yeah, exactly. Right. And so like, we had a guy step on a rusty nail. And it, went through his boot. And so like having something to bandage that guy up with and be like, all right, you're going to go to the hospital, obviously, but at least like you won't get blood in your car is definitely valuable, right? Having something to clean that out as quickly as possible right away is also good, right? Tetanus sucks.
Yeah, not having to just stick a thumb in it, right? That's probably good.
Yeah, like pack it with dirt and keep going is not the best approach to life.
Yeah. And like people might say like, well, if you're at a curated field, then the field should have first aid kit. Agree with you. A, you might not be playing at a curated field, but B, even if you are, if you have a boo-boo on yourself, being able to take care of it with your own supplies is just faster and easier. You don't need to involve anybody else. You don't have to go hunting for a first aid kit, and you could just take some time in the safe zone. Like I remember getting shot in the face before and the cheek. Not going to happen this year with my new face bro. But having a little bleeder on the cheek and Pat just coming by with a little band-aid and just stick it right on my face just to staunch it. Not that it really needed to be staunch, but just to cover it up, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that you can do quickly if you're properly equipped, right? And it's not going to break the bank to do that. So it's very confusing for me when people don't carry at least something. You know what I mean?
And like we talk about, comfort as a factor in, sort of team morale and like playing the long game if we're playing longer games and stuff. And like I've had blisters on my feet and taken my boots off and put a bandage on them and kept going. And you know what? The bandage helped. And so for the $5 that I spend on bandages every 2 years, and the $10 I spend on, a little spray bottle of antiseptic, that's pretty easy for me. It's on my kit. And one of the perks there is, it's on my kit. So like if someone has a little cut and needs attention on the field and we're at a curated field and they have a first aid kit somewhere, well, mine's on me. I know where it is. I know how to use it. And there you go, right? Like, so even if someone has, a chunk cut out of their arm and, on a nail or a piece of metal or whatever, because like most curated fields, I think, have, some rusty metal kicking around, just judging from other people's YouTube content, put it that way.
Yeah.
At least I can slap a compression bandage on that or a surgical bandage on that to keep it from bleeding and keep it from getting dirtier while they go get a first aid kit or while,
totally.
Any other things that need to happen are happening. It's, and I don't think it's a like, oh, Pat, are you being a little paranoid here? I mean, I want to say yes, but I also have used the thing every single season. Right?
Exactly.
So in seasons, like there have been a couple of seasons since I started playing Airsoft where I played 3 games and I still used it. Right. And I mean, part of it probably comes out of the fact that, I was in the Boy Scouts and Be Prepared, was sort of hammered into me in that way, but it's useful. Right. And like the Be Prepared thing notwithstanding. Yeah. I hike. I did a lot of hiking in Boy Scouts. A first aid kit is a thing that should be in your backpack if you're hiking. Just, again, a small, like, as Phil's calling it, a boo-boo, an ouchie kit, whatever. It doesn't need to be like, oh my God, I can do surgery with this. In fact, it probably shouldn't be unless you are a doctor. And if you are, you know more about this than I do. But basic first aid, it's easy to pack a little first aid kit. I think mine is probably 6 inches by 6 inches, right? There are a bunch of places that make, a good personal first aid kit pouch if you're wearing Molly gear. It takes up space that I was otherwise not going to use. Like it's not adding a whole lot of weight, really.
Yeah, I know Chris has a small one on the back of his belt, like easy peasy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just good sense to carry one, even if you're keeping it in your bag and keeping it in the safe zone. At least you have it, you know where it is. If you've got a little cut or whatever, you can use it to clean that up and not have to worry about it.
Yeah, I don't carry mine on my person. I have it in my bag in the safe zone. And I mean, that's fine. But I think to your point, like, I've been playing Airsoft since 2006, right? I don't recall any season of Airsoft where someone did not get hurt in some way, right? I wouldn't say they're injuries, because, that's, quite serious. We're not talking about like broken legs and stuff.
Yeah, we've had blessed few of those.
Yeah, but we've seen all kinds of accidents and situations where people have hurt themselves in small to medium ways, and some of them did require first aid kits, some of them did not. I mean, I mentioned on the podcast, I can't remember, I think it was last time, maybe before, I fell over while I was wearing my plates and I had a hairline fracture in a rib. Obviously didn't need a first aid kit for that, but we also played a game up at Redcliffe many years ago with one of your acquaintances, Pat, who was running through a building and he just creamed his skull on a piece of rebar that was dangling down that he hadn't seen. And he just went arse over kettle, as we say in Newfoundland. He just went flat on his back.
Oh, yeah. And like he
was bleeding from the head, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure he was out for a minute, if I'm being honest. But like, so obviously afterwards he went to the emergency room at the hospital.
Yeah.
But like, for anyone who doesn't know, any kind of cut on your scalp bleeds incredibly, and so having something to wash that out and patch it up, because the cut wasn't a threat, like he needed to go to the hospital because he almost certainly had a concussion.
Yes, yeah, totally.
But not having blood in his eyes or all over his face while he was walking the 20-minute hike out to the parking lot with us was definitely a useful thing, right? Again, not bleeding in people's cars while they take it to the hospital is real nice.
Yeah, and we've seen it every single year, right? Not necessarily to this level, like this guy.
Obviously,
that was
one of the worst
fine.
ones.
P.S. Yeah, he was okay. He's best.
He is no less sensible than he was when he showed up.
But those are the kinds of things that can certainly happen. And, if you're playing with people who don't wear the same level of PPE, whether they're not wearing helmets or gloves or, not boots or what have you, maybe they got, like me, like in the summer months, I'll roll my sleeves up. Well, if you roll your sleeves up, you're exposing yourself to potential to like bleeders on your arms or just nicks and scratches and all this kinds. Like we see it all, like there's every year, I'm positive there are games every single year that in my memory that I've gotten off the field with some sort of cut, nick, scrape, or whatever.
Oh, man,
and
all the time.
It's
Like-
good to be able to take care of it yourself. As a bit of a tip, one of the things that I really like to put in my boo boo kit is something like a Polysporin, which is a topical antiseptic, like an antiseptic ointment, but they make a version that has an analgesic in it, which is really helpful because if you have a cut and it sort of stings, you put that on there, it takes care of, keeping the wound clean, keeping it moist. You can put a bandage on it, and with the analgesic, you also don't feel it. So it's just, again, coming back to comfort for like boo-boos, nicks, and scrapes. It's just a really good, for me, it's a really good ad, and it's not like super expensive either.
Yep. One other thing that's been in mind is, I carry Tylenol. Partly that's the only thing you can give people here in Canada that's without being a first responder and having, certifications and stuff. Partly, I would be lying if I said that no one I've played Airsoft with has shown up hungover and been glad that I had Tylenol in my bag.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, like, these are not egregious expenses. They're useful things to have kicking around. If you really want to be clever, you can toss like a stick of Benadryl Limit or Afterbite in there for the inevitable fly bites that you get. At least if you play somewhere like here where you just are one fly bite if you roll up your sleeves in the woods for 10 minutes. I don't mean you have one. I mean, you've become one.
Yeah. You'll get devoured.
So yeah, I think that's a useful piece of kit. And like all told, I think the pouch that I'm currently running it in was like $20. The first aid kit contents is probably $40, so it's $60, but mine is a little more comprehensive than you honestly need.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if you're keeping it in your backpack. You can buy pretty nice ones for, again, like most drugstores sell prepackaged ones, right? That are, this is everything you'd need and then some.
Yeah, my wife and I just bought one that we put in our hiking backpack. I mean, I can't remember how much it was, but it was just sort of like cheap, inexpensive.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
You really have no excuse not to have it.
They're cheap enough that the government will pay to put them in classrooms.
Yeah.
So the next thing I think, that's worth mentioning in terms of like cheap things that you should probably think about putting in your kit that I've definitely forgotten. And, this one's straight off of my literal list of things to refresh that I told you I was going to create after our last episode. I did. Is, make sure you have some sunblock. Make sure you have some, again, if you're somewhere with a lot of flies, some fly dope. Fly repellent for those of you who aren't from here. They're not super expensive, but you'll be handily glad to have them every time you play for the entire season, I imagine. We do get a couple of days a year where we're playing in the rain or the gray. More than a couple. We live in Newfoundland. But, you can burn pretty badly on a gray day if the UV index is high enough. I know I have because I didn't think about it. And I don't like being uncomfortable is really what it comes down to, like if I don't need to. So, having a horrible sunburn because I'm a dumbass is not my favorite.
Yeah, and again, like it's similar to the first aid kit principle. Like it's not like this is a super onerous item to have. You don't have to carry it on your person, obviously. Keep it in your bag. But
yeah, that lives in my backpack.
Yeah, like why wouldn't you have some? Like, my skin is a little bit more olive complexion. I find I don't burn quite as bad.
I am Irish. I turn red. Then I turn back to being pale. It's wonderful.
Yeah. But there's really no reason not to have it, right? Even if you have a darker complexion for your skin, you want to make sure that you are protecting yourself from, UV rays, right? Yeah. So skin cancer is a real thing.
I was about to say, skin cancer is not a joke, right?
Yeah, totally. And there's, again, really no excuse, right? When you're active, you should be wearing sunscreen. And there's really nothing else to say about that. It's not I wouldn't call this a fun item, but it's certainly something to think about. If you haven't thought about it already, I would agree with Pat to include in there.
So in terms of fun items, and this is a theme for us. This is definitely something we've returned to. But like, if you're looking at your kit for the season and you've got your rifle squared away, however you want it, let's kind of checklist this. So you have a rifle. Great. You're happy with how it shoots. Great. Do you have a decent optic for it? Is it dialed in? Do you have spare batteries for your decent optic? Right?
Yeah.
Speaking as the guy who shows up with an optic that's dead because he left it on in between games. It's a useful thing to have. And again, we're planning a trip to the drugstore anyway to get first aid kit stuff. So check that box. Watch battery for airsoft gun sight. Done. do you have some sort of a foregrip? Because they're $10. You know, and like, don't get me wrong, you can buy a branded real Magpul one for, I don't know, $40, $50, $80 if you want to, but you can buy a repro one for 10, and it might be a little bit less nice, I guess. I don't know. But it will give you a lot of benefit.
Yeah, coming back to the optic for 1 second, one of the things that I've recently looked at this year is protectors, right? So for the last, since I've had it, the SRS, Trichicon SRS reproduction that I have, it came with a metal kill flash. And I'm on kill flash number 3, perhaps even number 4, because anytime it takes a hit, the kill flash sort of caves in, which is fine.
They're aluminum, they deform.
And, it protects the optic, which is great. But at the same time, like, I'm tired of buying $20 kill flashes just because every time I take a BB, like I went through 2 last year.
$20 kill flash is cheaper than $80 or $100 optic, but
well, after a while, like if I'm on number 4 and they're $20 each, well, then now I'm looking at the same price as my optic. Anyways, my point is to say that there are alternatives, I should say, that exist out there. And so one thing that I looked at this year was Lexan Protectors. Now, some people for airsoft use rail-mounted Lexan Shields, right? That just slap on your rail, sit in front of your optic.
They work great.
And they can sit at an angle or whatever, and they help deflect BBs away from your optic. And that is certainly one option that is available out there. And if you don't have one and you don't have any alternative, that might be a really good way for you to protect your investment. But one thing that you also can do, depending on the optic, especially if your optic is circular, like an Aimpoint, or in my case, an SRS, is you can get a piece of Lexan, right, that is thick enough that will stop a BB, that will fit or drop right over or into the socket of where your lens is for your red dot sight.
And it won't break the bank.
No, absolutely not. They're very inexpensive. If you know someone who actually has access to like a CNC machine or something like that, they can even cut it for you. And that's, in my case, that's exactly what I did. All you need to do is measure and figure out what exactly is the diameter that you need. And then you just drop it into the optic, drop it on top of your camera, whatever it is. And that is definitely worth looking into. There's other alternatives that exist for, let's say...
You can get them for EOTechs.
Yes, you can get them for EOTechs, yeah.
Which is pretty clever.
And so, like, those are really, really generally inexpensive, but they're a really great way to protect your investment. If you have an optic that you like, that you have dialed in, that you find works well for your purposes, you should absolutely have some sort of way to protect that optic. And I would say that, because we see it at the airsoft field all the time, not everyone has some sort of protector on the optic, because they're like, well, what are the odds that I'm going to get shot in the optic? Well, I'd say they're probably not very high, but they're certainly greater than 0. So if you're willing to roll those dice, it's kind of like me with my not getting my teeth shot out. Like, I've been very lucky for the last 15 years that I haven't had any incidents, but that's been luck. Like, I easily could have had an incident. And the same thing is true of your optic. Actually, the other day, Chaz showed us a picture of his Garmin watch that had gotten shot out at a game. The whole screen was just completely shattered. And I have a Garmin watch as well that I wear when I go playing airsoft, and I always put it on the inside of my wrist, but I also have a clear protector on top of it, specifically because I don't want anything happening to that particular investment, right? So if you have these types of pieces of kit that are expensive, that are sensitive, that a BB could accidentally break it, and you don't have an easy way of protecting it, then you should be looking at some sort of like Lexan protector that will really help you out.
One I'm going to throw out there in terms of this is also, so honeycomb kill flashes are pretty common. You can almost certainly get a 3D printing file for one. Now, a 3D printed object will probably only take 1 BB before it breaks, but it will deflect it off of your optic in all likelihood. So that's another avenue, especially if you're, either you own a 3D printer or if you're a student. A lot of schools have, or a teacher, a lot of schools have 3D printers. So, hey, easy to do. If your material that you have access to for 3D printing is not, an airsoftable color, you can spray paint the stuff. It won't melt. There you go. Cheap,
Yeah.
easy, quick, saves you a lot of trouble, right? The Lexan Protector, I think, is probably going to cost you about the same amount of money, also about the same amount of effort. If you're running a $20 optic, it's still probably worth the Lexan.
But at the same time, I would say, if you're running a $28 optic and you're like, this is perfect, this is exactly the optic that I need and it can't get any better, I would probably suggest that you go try some different optics and you'll find you'll probably be surprised at what is available out there. Like
There is perhaps room to reconsider, yeah.
Definitely. And, Pat and I talked about this a little while ago, but like we've seen airsoft magnifiers and we've been like, yeah, whatever. And then Pat gets a real magnifier and then immediately it puts that into relief and you're sort of like, oh, I get it now. Right. Yeah. But it's not until you try it that you're going to realize, whoa, hang on. And I felt the same way about my red dot sights. I had used my EOTech for years and years and years, and I thought it was fine. And then I used that SRS that Jason had, and I was like, whoa, dude, this is like really nice.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not even that nice of a red dot in the grand scheme of red dots. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I also used EOTechs. I think I've used probably a wider range of sights than you just because I keep buying things that are nonsense. And like the SRS are really nice. The sort of little Triticons that Chris and I run are fabulous. I'm really happy with them for an airsoft red dot. I definitely wouldn't go back to an airsoft magnified optic. Like I'm not willing to say, oh yeah, it was a good idea to buy the optic I bought for airsoft purposes. Mm-hmm. But like at least I'll never have the frustration of trying to use a magnified optic that is actually garbage.
Yeah.
That is pretty meaningful to me. Like just, oh yeah, this actually will do the thing I want it to do correctly without it being a pain in the ass is worth the money to me.
Definitely. I would agree for sure.
Accepting some insanity goes with that statement. And I think that, if you're running, like Phil said, if you're running a $20 optic and you're like, oh, it can't get better. Well, I've run a $20 optic and gone, oh no, this is pretty good. It might be worth your while to look at some other ones, especially if you're using, there's sort of a variety of really cheap airsoft red dots that I think most retailers have kicking around the shop. I've certainly seen them every single place I've been that sells airsoft guns, like sort of Walmart-esque as well. They're made of plastic. They are a red dot. They're kind of adjustable. If you're using one of those and going, oh, this is good enough, maybe try out some other stuff because those are really, they have a very narrow sight aperture and they're really not doing what a red dot should be doing for you.
Yeah, for sure. Just for a last point for me, I think one of the things when you're looking at your kit and you're looking for ways that you can sort of might be able to improve it and you may not have considered is looking at your mags. For a really, really long time, I used the cheapest mags that I could find. Like I'd find like
we literally used $5 mags, like $5 plastic mags, basically up until like I think we sort of stopped using them around when we started using $200 MOSFETs in our soft guns, and not a lot before.
Yeah, like we would buy like they were Star mags at the time. Star made like a 10 pack of mid caps, and it was like I don't know $70 Canadian or something like that for 10. And I'm like, this is great. That's exactly what I want, right? 10 mags. If I lose them, I don't care. Whatever. It's $7.
If I have to wrap tape around them to get them to shoot, not a big deal. It's $10.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I really tried to get as much as I could out of them. Like, oh, maybe I'll change the followers, then I'll be great. And the bottom line is they were just not very good. Like they worked fine for a couple months of use. Then maybe 1 full year they were great, and then after a while, like they just, you got feeding issues. Like it would skip BBs. The spring would get caught in the track. Stuff would get stuck in them. Like just a whole pile of different problems. And
long term, there were some quality control issues with those. And in fairness, for $7, we ought to have expected that.
Yeah, but on the flip side, for $7, we also didn't really care. Oh, it doesn't work really well, fine, throw it away. But at the end of the day...
Throw it at one of the other people on the team.
Well, yeah. Like, at the end of the day, what ended up happening from my perspective is I just realized that, we're having feeding issues. right? Depending on the gun body, it's not working really well. If it feeds fine in this gun, but it doesn't in the other. It'll feed fine in Pat's gun, but not in mine. Like all kinds of weird stuff that made troubleshooting a nightmare, number one. And it also meant that when you were hitting the field, you didn't know for sure if your mag was seated properly and whether you'd have to cant it in one direction or the other to get it to feed. And ultimately, it was just extremely frustrating. So after a while...
That's not to mention the fact that, like, you know, even when you go to the field with it all sorted out, right? You know, my mags and Phil's mags and Chris's mags and everyone else's on our team, our mags are interchangeable, right? Like, if we are playing for a day, we sort out who has whose mags at the end of the game before we leave. Yeah. That's it. Which means that if someone on the team is using mags that only sort of feed in one person's gun some of the time, you're like, oh, I put this in my gun and it's not in the right mag. Oh God.
Yeah, and it's frustrating for more than one person, etc. And so eventually we started looking at more expensive mags, and I think it was Stefan really who put me on to the PTS EPM mags. They're like 150 round mid caps, and they're $25 per mag. So they're literally more than 4 times as expensive per mag as what we were using before. But the difference is that they feed in basically everything. They feed perfectly fine.
They're back to the Sam Vimes law of economics, right? You know, they cost 4 times as much. They work in everything. They feed 100% of the time. And we've been using them for a couple of years, and they also aren't taking wear and tear.
Yeah. And so I think in particular, they're 4 times the cost, but they perform way more than 4 times better. Right. And fundamentally for me, it's not a headache anymore. Right. So when we're looking at when I'm putting one of these mags in the gun, I never have to wonder if everything is going to feed correctly. Right. Now, that being said, I did have a couple of issues with the first EPMs that I bought, but I was easily able to resolve that myself by disassembling it because, hey, they're good quality mags and you can disassemble them and fix them. And then the ones that I've gotten since then are totally, totally fine.
I mean, just the sentence, they're designed so that you can take them apart and fix them, gives you a distinct feeling that they're of a different quality than they're designed so that you throw them at someone when you break them.
Exactly. So totally, if you're looking at your kit and you're like, I don't know really what I can do to improve. Like for me, going from the cheapo mags that we were running before to these way more quality PTS EPM mags has made a world of a difference. And, just even small quality of life stuff, just that being able to at a glance know if the mag is completely full is very helpful. Being able to look in the little window and see, oh yeah, I've got about 10 or 15 rounds left because the little orange follower is showing up on the side of the, like all of this kind of stuff, just make it really convenient. And it adds a lot of value that I didn't really know I would appreciate until I started using them.
Yeah, I mean, they just make your life that little bit easier in a bunch of ways. The biggest thing for me, honestly, is I can slap them in any gun that I own that takes M4 mags, and every gun that I'm thinking about owning or likely to own in the near future that takes M4 mags, and they will feed.
Yeah, there's a user on Reddit, and what sealed the deal for me is I found this post on Reddit where they reviewed all different kinds of mags and different manufacturers of guns, and basically just did a huge spreadsheet, which of course speaks to my inner nerd. But basically, they just showed all the different manufacturers of guns, and said which mags feed perfectly in what. And at what point did they get skips when they were shooting full auto, skips when they were shooting semi, like all this kind of stuff. Extremely detailed, and by far and away, the best performing ones were the PTS EPM mags. So you don't always have to take my word for it. You can go and do that research for yourself and find this thread, and you can see the table. For improving my quality of life on the airsoft field, nothing has been more impactful than that, aside from maybe fancy socks.
And a gun that works.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, that is a perfectly valid and I think very useful thing to toss out there. I think the last piece of advice I want to give in that context is, at least today, is if you have, most of the rest of your gear squared away, look into some sort of Airsoft Grenade. There are a number of options that are pretty affordable. They are a game changer. They literally alter the way you play Airsoft.
Definitely.
They alter your options both in a large number of ways and in a bunch of ways that make you much more likely to succeed at any given objective on the field. I've had a lot of success using Airsoft Innovations Tornado and Tornado Impact grenades. Moderately less success with the second generation of those, the newer versions, but still success. There are just an abundance of options. Look into what's available and legal where you are. There are some areas where what you're allowed to own in terms of an airsoft grenade varies a lot, and that can definitely change what you want to be running. But ultimately, they're too much of a game changer not to be sort of worth your while. And I can definitely speak pretty positively about the tornado grenades in terms of both their ease of use and ease of maintenance and their ability to withstand me being stupid.
Yeah. And, I think we recognize that, at time of recording, there's a bunch of stuff that's happening with Airsoft Innovations and their flak 10s and 25s and stuff, which we're not going to get into. But there are retailers that have their different tornado products that are available. We still believe, and we still, regardless of what's going on with them, it's still a good product. So if you're able to get them, or you can get used tornadoes, which I'm always trawling the internet for people being like, oh, I got some tornadoes I don't use anymore. I usually try and pick them up. And I know as well, talking to Chaz in the States, people are really fond of I think there is called the Enola Gaze EG67, which are pyro grenades.
Yep. I've definitely heard of those being used a lot, heard a lot of positive reviews. Obviously, pyro grenades being illegal in Canada, neither of us has tested them.
That's correct.
So, your mileage may vary.
But there is something to be said, though, about a reusable grenade in the context of I've had my tornado, my orange one, since 2013, 2012, maybe, and still going strong. And I've deployed it at this point. I mean, I don't know if I've deployed it thousands of times, but certainly hundreds and hundreds. So if I had to pay every single time that I deployed it, let's say, I don't know how much an EG67 is, but let's say it's $5, I'm still way in the money, right?
And, it eliminates the is this a $5 problem question that will linger in the back of the heads of some players. I'm one of them. And I also, we have no insight into the situation with the flak shotguns or anything like that. But if you're buying from a retailer and they have them in stock, they're the people who are on hook for them. In terms of needing support for them, they're, the parts kits are also probably available. Honestly, a lot of retailers have stocked them for a long while now. But they're also not a thing we've used a ton of. I think the thing we run through the most in that sense mechanically is pins, because we lose them. And those can be made out of a metal coat hanger that you buy at Walmart for $1.
Yeah, exactly.
So, doesn't seem like too big a deal to me. And like I said, they're just, they're a game changer. They're loads of fun. They're very satisfying to deploy in games. They can often, like I said, win you the day. And if you have it left, loaded at the end of the game, and before you head off to go home, they're great fun to just sort of play hot potato with, juggle, whatever.
Or you just degas them like a normal person, right? Like whichever you want. But the whole point is there is no extra expense aside from the gas that you put in it and the BBs, which cost essentially nothing.
I'd pretend to offense it like a normal person, but we all know I'm not.
Yeah. And like the BBs you're going to use in those grenades can also be junk BBs, right? Because you're not shooting them out of a barrel.
I refill them out of the catch box from testing guns to make sure they're firing right.
Right. So they're a great way to go through a lot of that stuff as well. So if you have an opportunity, I know there's a couple of different manufacturers now that make reusable airsoft grenades as well. I think ASG Storm is one. I've never had the chance to use it, but in talking to a few people on the Discord, they say they probably wouldn't recommend them. There's a bunch of different other ones too, different options. But like Pat said, they do, and we've talked about this on the podcast before and on videos, grenades do something for you on the field which no other piece of kit is capable of doing. And consequently, if you want that added flexibility, that's the only way you can do it, right? There is no other thing that can give you the flexibility of putting something in a room and potentially tagging out the players that are inside without exposing yourself to fire.
Yep.
It just, there's nothing else, right?
Man, do I love not going into rooms.
Yeah, totally. 100% agree. So guys, that's our overview of some of the different things you might want to consider when you're looking at your airsoft kit and thinking, yeah, you're done. You know, I have that itch a lot when I look at my kit and I'm like, yeah, I don't really need anything else, but I kind of want to spend money on airsoft. Those are some ideas that hopefully will work for you in the same way that they've worked for us, in making yourself a little bit more flexible, improving your quality of life, improving the quality of life of those around you, whether they're your immediate teammates or just people who you're playing with. And at the end of the day, will just help you get more out of your airsoft experience when you're hitting the field, right?
And hey guys, if you've listened to this and you want to sort of delve more into this sort of idea, or if you have suggestions for things that we could think about adding to our gear that is maybe not a thing we've thought of or talked about, we would love to hear from you in our YouTube comments, on our Discord, any way you want to reach out. We are happy to have suggestions anytime.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. Like we always say, if you want to join the Discord, the link is in the description. But until you do, we don't have anything else for you. That's everything for us this week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week, guys.